This was recorded late October at Charlestown Breachway on the southern coast of Rhode Island. It's a beautiful day, but a little bit foggy, and there were a ton of fishermen here that day. The Breachway has become one of my favorite places to fish for striped bass. There's plenty of parking with great access to the surf, and where the salt pond meets the ocean, there's a little inlet and a jetty that juts out. I always like to test the surf when I first get here, but this day I wasn't having much luck, so I moved quickly over to the jetty, and there was a ton of action here. I fished here about 3 or 4 times now, and on most days if you make it to the tip of the jetty, you'll see a bunch of fish kind of congregating right where the inlet meets the ocean. The tip of the jetty can get really dangerous and slippery when the waves hit the rocks, and there's always a ton of people there. So sometimes I just like fishing the sides where there's still plenty of action. Unfortunately, things don't always go to plan, and sometimes the tide or the wind can push the fish up to the front of the jetty. Here I'm hooked up to a fish that swam up to the front, and I'm making my way over. And on the screen right here is a guy that's not wearing studded boots, and you can see him struggling down there. It's really slippery, and the waves are pounding on the rocks. Super dangerous because the ribs and the current down here is really strong. You could easily have been swept out into the ocean. I really like fishing here because the action's always great. But when it gets crowded like this, and it's almost always crowded, I tend to stay back a little because at the end of the day, it's just fishing, and there's plenty of opportunities to catch fish almost anywhere in Rhode Island. And I don't like putting myself out there to potentially get hurt or worse. Eventually, I moved back to the surf because the action's really heated up. A lot of the fish that were out front have pushed into the shallow areas of the surf. There are a ton of fish blitzing everywhere, and if you look closely, you can see them shining kind of in the wave. But equally, there's as many fishermen kind of standing right by you, shoulder to shoulder. But 100% I prefer fishing this way because it's better than fishing on a slippery jetty with waves crashing at your feet and people packed in it in an even smaller condensed area. As you can see, I'm hooked up and the guy next to me is hooked up and people are just hooking up everywhere. And I thought I had a really big fish on the line because I'm using a fairly large plug in hopes to kind of target the bigger fish. But unfortunately, this guy is hooked on the side of its body. And I think every fish from this point on that I hook up with is snagged in one way or another. There's just so much fish in the water that when I'm throwing these large plugs around, something just gets snagged. And it feels a little bit like I'm cheating. But the weather was perfect and the sunset was beautiful. And there were just so many fish. They weren't large by any measure, but this is probably going to be one of my most memorable fishing trips this year.